Again, thank you so much for attending our Lunch and Learn today. We have Elliot Anderson and Jerry Schnorr, a couple of the researchers that helped out with the Central Iowa Source Water Research Assessment Report. But before we get into our presentation, we also have a special guest, Polk County Supervisor Angela Connolly, who is here to introduce the report. So Angela, go ahead and take the floor.
Okay, thank you, Cassie. I really appreciate it today. First of all, I just want to thank everybody who's joining today. As you all know, there is so much momentum right now, and I hope we can continue since we introduced this the 1st of August, August 4th, I think it was. There's been a lot of chatter about this report, mostly positive, a little negative, but particularly after EPA came out and discussed negativity about our rivers, which is unbelievable to me. So what I hope we continue to do is move this report forward and get as much activity as we can, particularly when the legislators get back in session, and continue to talk about the importance of making our rivers safe, not only for, most importantly, our drinking water, but so that we can continue to recreate and make our rivers safe. So we have excellent, this was hours and hours of research with 16 scientists. I continue to say that you have to believe in the science. It was data driven. They worked a year and a half of compiling all this information, and you just can't go against what science has given us. And the ban of the water with Des Moines Water Works certainly was a wake-up call for all of us, I think. But the importance of the nitrates in our water system has put us all on our heels, and we all want to make sure that it's safe for drinking and, as I say, to recreate in our water. So I know Jen couldn't be here today, but she was really the instrument in getting everyone together, and really our project manager on this, Jen Terry. I'm sorry she couldn't make it today, but she's really been leading our way of getting everyone together and putting this together, so I can't thank her enough. And we have two awesome scientists from the University of Iowa that will take you through this report, which is really awesome. Elliot Anderson and Jerry Schnorr, who will lead this. And hopefully you'll be able to understand and get the importance of carrying on and making sure our voices are heard, not only through our communities and any boards that you sit on. Just let us know if you want more information or if you want us to do presentations. We're happy to do that. But really, we want our voices heard at the legislature. We need to change our regulations, and we need to let people know that we're ready to change our laws. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elliot Anderson to start us off on this water report.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Supervisor Conley, both for your kind words just now and also for your support throughout the entirety of this project. So Jerry and I are really excited to share some of the major findings of the Central Iowa Source Water Research Assessment, or CISWRA report for short. I did just want to mention at the outset, so there were several official documents released as part of this report, and those can be found online. So if you have additional questions or want to grab some of the figures and tables that were going to be presenting today, you can find those at the Polk County website, and I believe Cassie will be sharing a link to all of the documents after this meeting. So often when we begin these presentations, we'd like to say a few words at the start just about the importance of the Des Moines and the Raccoon River watersheds and the importance of water quality throughout the state of Iowa. But I really think there's probably not a better group than the one I'm talking to today that already knows just how important those things are. So I'll just say at the start here that really it was a recognition on behalf of the Polk County Board of Supervisors on how critical water quality and water quantity is to the state of Iowa. That was the impetus behind this report. And so we really appreciate their interest in this topic and all the support that they've given us throughout the past couple of years. And so CISWRA officially began in 2023. And really what this project was trying to do was comprehensively study the water-related issues of the Des Moines and the Raccoon rivers. It was commissioned, as I said, by the Polk County Board of Supervisors and lasted just over 2 years or so from when the project officially got underway to when the documents were officially released a couple of months previously. One of the important things that we always like to state at the outset anytime we're talking about the CISWRA project is just the very important point that watersheds and water bodies are highly connected. And so even though Central Iowa was in our name officially, a lot of the water quality challenges that we have within Polk County and other parts of the Des Moines metro aren't just contained to that local area. They're related to what's going on upstream. And so as you follow the Des Moines and Raccoon rivers up from the downtown area of Des Moines into the headwaters of both of these watersheds, a lot of the water quality issues that we have are intricately linked to what's going on in those other portions of the state. And so it's always really important to recognize that. And because of that fact, we didn't just focus on our analysis to Polk County specifically. We included the entirety of the Raccoon and Des Moines watersheds, which are shown over here in the map on the right part of the screen. Other thing about CISWRA is that it wasn't just a summary, comprehensive summary of the current state of the science. We also wanted to build some momentum on top of that and come up with a list of suggested action items so that people who are very interested in this topic and passionate about wanting to improve some of the things we talked about in the report could do so. And so at the very end of this presentation, I'll share a couple of those action steps with you. But it's just very critical to mention that at the start. This isn't just what is currently happening. This is what can we do to make things better. And so I've got a list of the 16 science advisors that worked on this project. Not shown here is, of course, Jen Terry, who's the project lead and whose leadership and organizational skills were really critical to moving this project along and getting things off the ground. But the team around her were these 16 scientists who had expertise in water quality issues. And you'll notice that from the group that we've got here, there was a lot of local affiliations. So several people with the University of Iowa, several people with Iowa State, and a couple other agencies within the state of Iowa. But we also brought in several individuals that had more national experience. So we had a couple of people with the U.S. Geological Survey and a couple of people affiliated with Argonne National Laboratory. And so it was a very nice mix of both local and national expertise that worked on this project. I do want to especially mention a few of the advisors that you're seeing here. First would be Jerry Schnorr, who led the drinking water chapter, and he'll be giving a couple of remarks later in this presentation. Also was Dr. Larry Weber, who led the chapter that was on river flow. Dr. Claire Fruby, who led the chapter on recreation, and then finally Dr. Peter Levi, who led the chapter on ecological health and river life. And so because water quality is a very, very big and really all-encompassing topic, when we were presenting the materials and figuring out how to best organize them and share them with the public, we divided them into the 4 sections that I just mentioned. So those are really the 4 major chapters that comprise the CISWRA report. And so with the completion of this report, we had 3 major documents that were released just about a month and a half ago or so. The first and most important is what's listed in the middle here, and this is called the Currents of Change Report. This is the primary product, and it's about 100 pages long. And it really is an attempt to both summarize the science, but make it as reader-friendly and as easily digestible as possible. So we worked with a communications expert and a local graphic designer to help create some graphics and help organize these materials in a way that was very, very aesthetically pleasing. And that's what's included in the Currents of Change document there. We also had a more technical report, and this was the full-length scientific assessment. So this was a document that's much longer. It's about 200 pages in total, but this really reads more like a technical report, which provides some of the very important and robust scientific analysis that underpins everything that's included in the more public-facing document. And then finally, we had an executive summary. Because these documents are so long, we wanted to provide an easier access point. And so that's what the executive summary does. It's approximately a 5-page document. And highlights the very basics of water quality throughout the Des Moines area and some of the areas that we're most concerned about. So with the rest of this presentation, Jerry and I are going to jump in and give a little bit of a sampler for the types of things you can find within the report itself. Because it is 100 pages, because there are so many topics, we can't really talk about every single one of them in a presentation like this, but we've tried to come up with some of the highlights and give you guys a little bit of a feeler for how we were talking about these issues and some of the things you can find within the reports themselves. And so the first chapter, as I mentioned here, was on river flow. Again, I know this group knows this, but often when we begin this discussion, we just like to highlight the fact that river flow or stream flow is very, very important for all aspects of water quality within Iowa. It really is the driver that determines how many pollutants end up in the waterways at certain parts of the year. It also determines how much recreational activity we can have, how we can use water for various different resources, for various different things that people want to tap into the Des Moines and Raccoon rivers for. And then it also impacts many other things like drought or flood risk, and really just is interconnected with aquatic life and pretty much everything you can think of when it comes to source water in Iowa. Now, the general rule of thumb within the state of Iowa is that about 2/3 of the precipitation that lands around the Des Moines area makes its way off of the landscape through evapotranspiration. The rest of that either ends up in Iowa's groundwater or ends up running off into the rivers or streams. And so as Iowa has changed throughout the past decades and centuries, that's had a very, very big influence on the water cycle. And so some of the trends, some of the things that we see with water movement today in the state is very, very different than it was 150 years ago before settlement. And that has big knock-on effects, both for stream flow, but also for water quality. So one of the things we like to do with the CISWRA project is really just highlight the current data sources that are available. So when it comes to stream flow, it's a relatively straightforward story. So the U.S. Geological Survey maintains the most extensive monitoring network of stream flow in the entire nation. They have a very robust network within the CISWRA watershed itself. And so these are the gauges that are shown over here on the map on the right. It's about 24 or 25 of them located within the CISWRA watersheds. You notice downtown that there are more gauges that are generally placed in that area because people have a higher concern about the stream flow that's going through that part of the metro because it is so sensitive to flooding and potential droughts. But this network has gone a long way for us both being able to describe stream flow conditions throughout the watershed, but also track how these have changed over time. So what we really wanted to get into with this chapter of the report was documenting how the water cycle in the Des Moines metro area has changed over the past several decades. And we're able to do that by going in and looking at long-term historical data sets. And there are a couple of important points that I always like to make when we're talking about this specific issue here. The first is when you're in a situation like Des Moines, you have a very, very different sort of land use breakdown between what's happening in Polk County and what's happening in the upstream part of the watershed. So you can see that in the graph over here at the bottom right. If you look at the developed area, as we all know, kind of picture the urban and suburban sprawl that takes place within Des Moines, there's quite a good amount of developed area, about 30 to 40% within Polk County. And of course, that gets even higher when you go into the city of Des Moines itself. Once you get farther up, it's a much more rural environment. You have a much higher percentage of cultivated crops, things like traditional corn and soybean row crops. And so this split between urban and rural ends up affecting a lot of the water quality issues that we see throughout the nation, but in Polk County specifically. One of the other big things that's changed over time is the nature of precipitation. And so over the past 50 years, we can do an analysis and show that Polk County now receives a little bit more rainfall than it did in years previous. So it had an average annual amount of rainfall of about 30 inches back in 1950. Up to present day, that's closer to 36. Along with that, we also see a change in the amount of extreme precipitation events that we have. So Polk County now has a tendency to have more days with heavy rainfall, followed by a collection of more days without decent amounts of rainfall. So not only have things become wetter, they become a little bit more extreme over the past several decades. The other thing that's important to note about rainfall is that it follows really, really strong seasonal patterns, and that ends up having a big influence on water availability and water quality. Typically, we tend to see heavier rainfall and therefore higher stream flow in the spring and summer months. It can certainly vary depending on if we have a big snowmelt event or a big rainfall event later in the year. But if you follow the general trends long term, that's pretty clearly what we see when it comes to seasonality in this part of the state. So one of the things that we did was we took a look at historical stream flow records and we examined how they changed over time. What we're able to do is go in and gather streamflow data that had been collected over the past 70 years at several different USGS gauges throughout the watershed. And this is just an example of the type of analysis you can do. And so what this plot is showing on the very top is it's taking the lowest streamflow value that occurred within any day over the past 70 years and looking how that changed throughout time. The middle graph here is doing a similar thing, but it's taking the average streamflow value. And then at the bottom, we have the maximum streamflow value that occurred. And so when you go in, and so a couple of things to note about this. The first is it's just really, really important to note that there's a lot of variation here. Because of year-to-year variation in precipitation, you can also get highly variable amounts of streamflow from year to year. So very, very wet year, you can see that we have mean streamflow values that are very, very high. Very, very dry years, we have streamflow values that are quite low. What we're able to do with more sophisticated statistical techniques is examine how things have changed long term and account for some of the short-term variation that we can get from year to year. If we do that, we find that the low flows are getting much, much higher. So the streams that we have in and around Polk County don't dry out as much as they used to. They tend to retain more water than they did over the previous decades. And so we get a large, statistically significant increase to the low flows. When it comes to average flows, things are also going up, but not quite as much as the low flows in that part of the stream flow distribution. So the low and the average part of the flow regime, those have pretty clearly gone up in and around Polk County. High flows, we see some minor increases, but it's not as statistically significant. So the high flows that we're getting in a given year, those might be going up a little bit, but the drastic changes that we're seeing are more closely related to the low flows and the average flows. And so when it comes to this sort of change that we see in the water cycle, another thing that's important to realize is that these aren't necessarily good or bad. It's a little bit different than water quality, where we can, more simply say we have more of a pollutant coming into a water body, that's bad. If we have less of it, that's good. When it comes to stream flow, it kind of just depends on your perspective and the issue that you're most concerned about. So some of the pros that we've had from these changes is that now there's more water available to people that want to dip into the rivers and use that water. So the drinking water sources or potentially using that for some industrial processing. We now have more of that available, which is good. It's possible that these higher low flow conditions can also create better recreational opportunities for people. If you have streams that are more perennial, again, that don't dry out as much, there's probably a better opportunity for people to get into the water more often. And then in some cases, you can have these higher levels of water actually diluting certain pollutants that make their way into the streams and making them less toxic, less dangerous overall. But on the other hand, there are also several cons that can come from increased stream flow. Probably the most obvious one is a bigger flood risk. So if you get the same amount of rainfall, but previously you had a lot less water in the stream, well, there's nowhere for that rainfall to go. It previously could have held up some of the capacity of the riverbed, but now it's going to be making its way into the nearby areas and potentially increasing flood risk. This sort of thing also makes the rivers potentially a little more dangerous for people to go on and can increase some of the erosion that exists. And then these sorts of things can also transport different pollutants that are more closely linked with surface runoff. So you could be diluting certain pollutants, but bringing others in. So it's not a clear picture when it comes to this sort of analysis on what the long-term impact is for water quality. It really just depends on your perspective. So the second chapter that we wanted to go over was ecological health and river life. And so discussions about ecological health really come down to the well-being of the plants and animals that exist within the water bodies that we have within Iowa. And so there are a couple of different ways people have gone about trying to summarize just how quote unquote healthy Iowa streams are. But the two metrics that are most commonly used are what are known as the Fish Index of Biologic Integrity, or FIBI for short, and the benthic macroinvertebrate index of biological integrity, BMIBI for short. And what we've done in the graph here is just summarized over the past 10 years what the breakdown is of these different metrics. And so ecologists will go out to a water body, take a bunch of measurements and compare that to a water body that they know to be very pristine and very good ecological health. And from that, they can boil all that information down to one number, and then they use those numbers and break things into categories. And so you see over here on the left, the fish index of biologic integrity. About 56% of the streams within the CISWRA watershed were classified as in fair condition. 35% were in good condition. This is something that can really vary a lot depending on where you're at. If you're in a watershed that is very, very pristine within the CISWRA water body, then you can come up with some very, very healthy streams. But on the other hand, there are several streams that have been pretty heavily degraded, and so the water quality, ecological health can be quite poor in those areas. It's a similar split when it comes to the benthic macroinvertebrate index. And so for this, when ecologists go out, they aren't looking at fish, they're looking at smaller animals that you can see that are on the bottom of water bodies. So these are things like worms or snails, also very important to ecological health. And again, you get about a 50-50 breakdown here between fair and good. Another big issue for ecological health that can happen a lot more suddenly and can be quite catastrophic are fish kill events. And so fish kills broadly just refer to any time there's a large die-off of fish, something that's unnatural or remarkable, something beyond what you would expect to see traditionally as part of a fish's natural life cycle. So these are all the ones that have been monitored and investigated within the CISWRA watersheds in the map here. So they do happen all throughout the watersheds. But one important thing to note is that these are only investigated and known about if somebody sees them, usually a citizen walking around at a local lake or stream. They see a bunch of fish and they'll call the DNR to inform that a fish kill event has happened. And so there are almost certainly other events that have happened throughout the watershed, but they just haven't been noticed by anyone. Notice here that there tends to be a higher clustering down in the city of Des Moines and down in Polk County itself. So that might be due to pollution. That might also be related to the fact that there are just more people around this area. And so you have more potential for people to spot fish kill events and report them to the IDNR when they've happened. Fish kill events can be very, very small. They can also be very, very big. The largest one that ever happened within the state of Iowa killed over 1 million fish, and it was located at the very northern part of the CISWRA watershed. This was due to an ammonia spill in a pipeline that broke. And so they can be pretty catastrophic sometimes when you have a big contamination event. People will also go in and they've assigned an economic value to the amount of fish that have been killed within each one of these fish kill events. And that's something that over the years has totaled to a couple of $1 million within the CISWRA watersheds. There'll also be an investigation that tries to track where these events have occurred. It's been about 140 in total within the Des Moines and Raccoon rivers. 40 of those, they haven't really been able to figure out what caused these. So it's still a bit of a mystery. Out of the 100 or so that they have, 60% of those have been caused by human events. So these are things like direct pollutants that have been discharged into a waterway that have acutely killed many of the fish there. And then the remaining are what are classified as natural or environmental kills. So this would be something like a harmful algal bloom popping up and resulting in low dissolved oxygen levels, which end up killing a bunch of fish. So lots of variation when it comes to this sort of thing, and get more into the specific details within the CISWRA report. So last topic, just on ecological health that we always like to talk about, is that the areas in and around water bodies, this riparian corridors, are very, very important and good to protect. And they're important for many reasons, but perhaps the most obvious is just that any areas around rivers can be highly prone to erosion. And just got an example of that shown in the photograph series here. This is at the intersection of 4 Mile and Little 4 Mile Creek down in the southeastern part of Des Moines. And this was the aerial imagery over in 2009, and then this middle photo was showing the aerial imagery in 2016. You can see even over that 7-year period, there was quite a bit of erosion and deposition happening within this this relatively tiny stream. And that's important because if you're in an area where there's a lot of infrastructure, that erosion can cause quite a bit of damage. And so we've had this happen a few times throughout the watershed where you've got an urban stream and the erosion is occurring right up into somebody's backyard, and that can cause a lot of property damage. Sometimes it can cause some major issues with infrastructure, and you can see that here where a sidewalk has been taken out. So this can be pretty concerning. It can also happen in rural areas too. And so we see that over here on the right. This is a photograph of some pretty intense stream bank erosion that had occurred outside of Des Moines. So it's just good to note that it's always better when we can to try to have these erosion activities take place in areas that are more upstream of the Des Moines metro itself, because that provides an opportunity for the energy of that water to be dissipated and for the erosion, if it has to occur in places that are less susceptible to damage, like downtown Des Moines would be. So finally, not only does it help reduce the risk of erosion, improving improving the ecosystem and protecting the areas around side rivers has a bunch of other benefits. If you're not developing in that area, it's reducing the flood risk, so there's just less property that's at risk. Um, these areas are very, very sensitive, and so protecting them, putting in good vegetation will highly promote the aquatic life that lives within them. And then finally, many of these vegetated areas can prevent some of the pollutants, can trap some of the pollutants, and prevent them from getting in the water in the first place. So very, very important areas to pay attention to. And in areas where we can go in and construct these vegetated buffers, that's always a good idea because it helps water quality both locally and downstream. So, and I think Jerry will have a few words about our drinking water chapter.
Thanks, Elliot. I should mention that we're both willing to answer questions at the end. On drinking water, this chapter of the CISWRA report had to do especially with nitrate, but we'll cover some other topics as well. On the left graph here, notice that if we plot the average nitrate concentrations in the Des Moines River through time, turning back the clock to early 1900s, 1906, 1907, we're always talking about concentrations below 1 milligram per liter. Typically, pre-settlement, the water ran clear and the nitrate concentrations were very low. But through development, both in urban and rural development, you can see in more recent years, 68 to 2024, the concentration has risen to 6 milligrams per liter. That's averaged over the entire year. So some much higher, some much lower. And on the right map, you can see, maybe you can see, the reddish colors indicate high average nitrate concentrations in rivers around the country. And we find that Iowa, and in particular the Raccoon and the Des Moines as well, have very high concentrations, 6 or even above 8 milligrams per liter on average. And in a recent survey, 2018, I think it was, in the journal Water Research, they looked at over 2,000 rivers throughout the United States. And we are in about the top 1% of those rivers in terms of our nitrate average concentrations. Next slide. So nitrate is a big burden. That means for drinking water treatment plants like the Des Moines Waterworks, and treating it, taking the nitrate out or blending it can be expensive and a pretty complicated proposition. As you know, the drinking water standard for finished drinking water in homes is 10 milligrams per liter nitrate, and that was set many years ago based on blue baby disease, methemoglobinemia, and we've had more recent reports since then. But we get concerned when the concentration in the source water, that's the water that the utilities have to work with, when the concentrations in the source water become greater than the red line across the plot here of 10 milligrams per liter. And you can see it's quite frequent since 2014 that the Raccoon River, as a source water for DMWW, rises above 10. Now, during the recent event where lawn watering was banned, partially banned in Des Moines and Polk County, we had the situation where the Raccoon River was above 10, the Des Moines River was above 10, and the pipe gallery underneath the Raccoon River was also above 10. So Des Moines had the situation where every source water that they had available to the Fluor Drive plant, for example, was above 10. You can't blend yourself out of that. There's no waters less than 10, and you can't send drinking water concentrations above 10 out, or you have to make public notice to all of the customers. So in this particular case, that means that the nitrate removal system has to come on. And the nitrate removal system, there's 6 units. They're limited in that they can't treat the entire flow going out to the customers. So that's the reason, the necessity of keeping the total flow delivered to customers down, and lawn watering helps with that a lot during hot summer months. So it's these excursions above 10 that are particularly troublesome. Next slide. And this is the part where when we had the public meeting at Drake University, I said, well, you may be wondering, where is all this nitrate coming from? And the answer is in our report that it's mostly coming from agricultural land. Of course, the watershed, the Raccoon and the Des Moines watershed that Elliot showed us, is predominantly agriculture. There are contributions from the urban areas, but they're very small in area, as you know from the map. Well, the agricultural land is about 80% of the total nitrate added to the rivers. Roughly 40% of that is from fertilizer directly applied onto ag land. About 20% is from manure directly applied onto ag land. And another 20% or so is from legumes, soybeans, and other legumes which fix nitrogen out of the atmosphere and can also be washed away down our rivers. You might be surprised to know that atmospheric deposition, rainfall and snowfall are also contaminated with nitrate, and that adds another 18% or so to the balance in our rivers. And another 2% or so comes from those smaller but important urban areas that we mentioned before. Next slide. Well, again, Des Moines is charged with delivering water to customers less than 10 milligrams per liter, the dashed line shown on the graph on the left. And 2015 was another year like this one that was really problematic. And this is for the Raccoon and Des Moines rivers, the yellow and green here. They're above the 10 milligrams per liter, a good portion of the entire year. But Des Moines was able to blend the water with lower nitrate concentrations and also remove some of the nitrate, such that they delivered to customers something shown on the purple line here, let's say between 6 and 8 milligrams per liter, meeting the EPA water quality standard for drinking water. Shown on the right slide are just the average annual concentrations in finished drinking water. And again, you can see that they can run anywhere from 2 to 8 milligrams per liter in recent years. But suffice it to say that they have been able to treat and blend the waters to concentrations below 10, and that's good. Next. Can we go back one, Elliot?
Yeah, sure.
But I should also say that we shouldn't take too much comfort in that, because recent health effects reports show that there can be other health effects besides blue baby disease at much lower concentrations. And maybe EPA should rework their standard. They're thinking about it, and maybe should be 5 or even 3 milligrams per liter based on these reports. And the health effects include colorectal cancer, bladder cancer, breast cancer, thyroid disease, and also birth defects like neural tube defects. So even at 6 or 8 milligrams per liter delivered, we still have concerns vis-a-vis health effects. Next. And of course, nitrates aren't the only problem in our rivers. There's toxins from harmful algal blooms, such as shown in the picture on the right. They affect both the Des Moines and Raccoon rivers and several other water bodies. These harmful algal blooms can produce toxins. Des Moines Waterworks is monitoring about 4 of them at any time, and EPA actually regulates 6 of them with health advisories. But the biggest one is microcystin, and that's the one that we worry about the most. It can be removed in the drinking water treatment plant, but once again, we can also blend to try to get around that particular problem depending on where the algal bloom is. Once again, Des Moines has avoided in its treated drinking water these harmful algal blooms to below health advisories. Next slide. Pesticides are another potential problem in our drinking water. As you can see in the map on the right, I was in the epicenter of the Corn Belt throughout the United States where a lot of pesticides are used. Our 3 biggest ones are in the left: glyphosate, acetylchlor, and atrazine. Glyphosate and atrazine have drinking water standards, and we're able to meet those again in finished drinking water. But the risk comes after application. When it rains recently after application, that there are concentrations that go up and they need to be removed or again blended away in the drinking water treatment plant. The health effects from these pesticides are largely unknown, but we are meeting the standards that do exist. There aren't standards for some of the pesticides and their metabolite products. Next. There's other contaminants, as you know. In the springtime, drinking plant operators worry about ammonia and organic carbon. It can come from snow melt in the late winter or early spring. It can come from fertilizers that have been applied and which were not nitrified, or from sediments. And when you chlorinate that to disinfect the water for sending out to customers, you form disinfection byproducts. Some of these are regulated by EPA, many are not, and some that are not are deemed more toxic than some that are actually regulated. In addition to what's been in the news a lot lately is the so-called forever chemicals or perfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS. And again, we have regulations on 2 of those at the very, very low level of 4 nanograms per liter. And I told folks at Drake University that 4 nanograms per liter, that's 4 parts per trillion. 1 part per trillion is equal to an analog is 6 inches on the way to the sun, 93 million miles away. Believe it or not, we can analyze for that, we can measure that, and believe it or not, it's possible there's health effects at that low of concentrations. So we worry about these forever chemicals in the future. And we haven't even talked about pharmaceuticals, drugs, personal care products, also found in our drinking water, many of which do not have drinking water standards. And this whole mixture, this milieu of chemicals, we don't really know what the health effects might be of all of these together. Next.
Great. Well, thanks, Jerry. So I just wanted to briefly go through the last chapter in the report, which was on river and lake recreation. So this was anytime people are planning on getting in a water body to do something like swimming or kayaking or even going out on the boat. And probably the biggest area of concern when it comes to recreation is the risk that you run by being exposed to some sort of pathogen, so a harmful waterborne bacteria or virus. Sometimes when you go in the water, these other pathogens can be present and can result in people getting sick. And so what we've done in this report is try to go through and summarize historically how often things like that have happened. One of the big challenges with pathogens is that there are hundreds of them potentially lurking in the water that can have adverse health impacts for people. We can't realistically test for all of them. So what people typically do is they'll go in and measure just for E. coli. So E. coli is what's known as an indicator bacteria. And it's because generally in previous studies, people have been able to link the presence of E. coli to these other harmful pathogens. So when more E. coli are present, people have traditionally gotten more sick And people have traditionally been exposed to higher level of pathogens. So because we can't measure them all, we just go in and measure one that's relatively easy to get our heads around, and that's E. coli. And when it comes to bacteria, this is kind of tricky because bacteria levels have been shown to come from a few different sources and have been shown to jump from low levels to high levels over very, very short periods of time. And so it's always good anytime you're planning on going out and recreating to take advantage of some of the safety sources that people have available. We've got one linked down here, which is from the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. They'll go out and repeatedly measure for E. coli at various rivers and beaches and give people a sense for what the levels are recently and what the overall risk is for going in and recreating at that water body with any sort of time. So it's important to know, though, that we're talking about probabilities really anytime we talk about bacteria. So we can never say for sure whether or not harmful bacteria are present or whether or not people will be exposed to them. But with E. coli, we can quantify the uncertainty there and come up with some decent estimates for just how likely people are to get sick. I mentioned these things vary a lot, but we have noticed a couple of general patterns within the CISWRA watersheds. One is that there tends to be higher amounts of E. coli in rivers and streams than at beaches. And similarly, there tends to be more at beaches than in open lakes. So if you were to go out to the middle of a big reservoir, maybe something like Saylorville Reservoir, that would have less E. coli than a beach, and that would have less E. coli than a river or a stream. Generally, in rivers and streams, E. coli values tend to be the highest following rainfall events, but they also can be high in certain circumstances under low flows when you have a discharge of some sort of waste. And so, again, a lot going on with E. coli and potential pathogen risks. Always good to look at the beach advisories before going out and recreating. So I'll just skip forward briefly in the interest of time here, but Jerry mentioned HABs earlier. HABs also pose a danger for recreation. The same toxins that can get people sick if they're in drinking water can also be poisonous to any people or animals that go in and recreate when there's a harmful algal bloom occurring. So if you ever see a water body that looks blue-green, don't get in it. It could potentially be part of a harmful algal bloom, and you could be exposed to toxins by touching that water. In the graph here, this is the number of times over the past 20 years or so that certain lakes and beaches have exceeded the recreational standards for microcystin, which is the most prominent toxin that we see in these harmful algal blooms. And you can see there's a lot of variation depending on where you go within the watershed. Some have never had an issue, some have had an issue quite often. And I should mention there's one good example here, Black Hawk Beach, where this shows 15%, but they've actually made a tremendous amount of progress here. Through upstream watershed management, they've been able to lower the amount of nutrients going into this watershed and therefore bring down the amount of harmful algal blooms that they've had in that area. One other thing we also like to mention, there are always some good practices that people can take anytime they enter a water body. So in the report, there are just some general tips for recreators on best practices for keeping safe. The last thing that was important about the recreational chapter was we really wanted to highlight just how valuable fishing was as both a pastime but also a food source within Des Moines metro. So a survey was done by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources a couple years ago, and they found that is Polk County the most frequently fished county within the entire state because of its large population. But about 50% of the people that fish right around the Scott Avenue and Center Street dams in downtown Des Moines use the fish that they collect as an important food source for their family. So it's more than just a hobby for those people. They rely on it as a source of nutrition. We've got some other stats down here at the bottom part of the slide, just trying to highlight how popular fishing is around the Des Moines area. Over 70% of people within urban areas in Iowa said they were interested in fishing. So there's probably a classic picture that people have of fishing in Iowa, which is you're out on some quiet, peaceful lake somewhere, which could certainly happen, but it's just as popular in urban areas for people to go out to the local rivers and streams there and fish. We also noted by looking at some of the demographics data that have been collected that the people fishing in downtown Des Moines and other parts of other urban areas are much more ethnically diverse than they are in the rest of the state. When you look at fishing out in Iowa as a whole, we have a population that tends to reflect what we have in the state as a whole, but when you go into the urban communities, again, it's much more ethnically diverse. And so last topic that we often talk about when doing these presentations is the topic of manure. And we do that because it really covers many of the different concerns that people have about water quality all at once. And manure has become a big issue in recent years, really because of two simultaneous trends. One is that we've been raising a lot more hogs throughout the state. So we've jumped from about 15 million to about 25 million over the past 25 years or so, with the amount of hogs that are reared at any given time. And over that same time frame, we've also seen a consolidation in the amount of operations that are hosting hogs. And so you put those two things together, you get a phenomenon like we've got in the graph shown over here on the left, where around 1997, in the CISWRA watersheds, there was about 1,000 hogs per hog rearing operation. Closer to current day, that number has jumped up to 6,000. And that's important because it gets much more difficult to safely manage manure when you have all of these hogs confined. It's a lot easier if you've got them spread out to distribute manure as a fertilizer product across the landscape. But when you've got everything stored in a lagoon or in a pit underneath a concentrated animal feeding operation, it's just much trickier to distribute all of that properly, and you're much more susceptible to a spill. So here are some of the numbers regarding manure within the watersheds. As you can see, hogs are the main contributor, but cattle are also a non-trivial component. We get about 300 million pounds of nitrogen produced in this manure every year and about 55 million pounds of phosphorus. And then we've talked about many things in this presentation. Manure has an impact on a lot of those. So if we can safely manage and store manure, we can handle we can reduce the risk for a lot of these water quality issues simultaneously. So the nutrients, pathogens, which can also come from manure, things like antibiotic resistance, the pharmaceuticals Jerry mentioned, and fish scales. And so just as we wrap up here at the end, we'd just like to say a couple of words. One about the executive summary. So I mentioned that at the beginning. One of the things that I think is nice about that executive summary document is not only does it provide a concise overview of the many topics that we've touched on in this report and in this presentation, but it also highlights the 6 issues that we were the most concerned about. So I always like to tell people that this is a really good place to start if you're new to water quality issues. It really highlights some of the most pressing challenges that the CISWRA watersheds face today, and so you can learn more about that there. And then just to close, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we also had several different action steps that we proposed as part of this project, and I've got them listed here. I won't go through them all. You can find many more details online, and we, in great depth, go into each one of these and specifically outline the type of positive steps that we think can be taken. But I just would like to note that we've broken these down to 3 large categories. The first is local or individual actions. So these are the sorts of things individual community members or local groups can take. We've got another longer section here on regional or watershed actions. So these would probably be the things that are most applicable to groups like the ones at this presentation today. So people that are operating on more of a watershed basis, these are the things that they can do to help improve water quality within the entirety of their basin. And then we also have a few here at the end about statewide actions. So these are things that groups that operate on a statewide level, namely the Iowa government, can do to improve water quality throughout the entirety of the state, which of course will help the Des Moines and Raccoon rivers within the state of Iowa. And so that concludes our presentation. Once again, thank you guys for all of your attention this afternoon. And I will go ahead and I guess turn things back over to Cassie, and hopefully we have time for a few questions.
Thank you so much, Elliot and Jerry, for the great information. And thanks again to Supervisor Connolly for making some remarks at the beginning. Jennifer Cherry's contact information is at the end slide here. She was the one that managed the whole CISWRA project. So you can reach out to her with additional questions as well. I did share a link in the chat for the executive summary and the full report if anyone's interested in taking a look at that now. If anyone has any questions, I encourage you to type them in the chat. We have a pretty large group, so it's going to make things run smoother if you can type your questions in the chat instead of unmuting yourself. I don't see anything right now, but we'll wait a few seconds just to see if there are any questions that pop up. Where's your next talk, guys?
I think it's to be determined. We've got a couple local ones at the University of Iowa to a couple of departments as part of their seminar, which should be nice. And then we'll be at the Iowa Water Conference
Oh,
later over in
mhm.
over in Ankeny, and that's always a really nice event.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So I want to thank you guys again for your time and thank you for everyone that tuned in today. Um, the next webinar will be in September and it will be me talking about native prairie sod. So stay tuned for information on that. If you want to be on my email list to learn more about these lunch and learns and to register, just go ahead and give me an email, cassandra.drool@polkcountyiowa.gov, and I can add you to that list. Also, if anyone has any ideas for future lunch and learns or future speakers, please let me know. I will keep these going as long as we have information to talk about. So thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.